Ever feel like some Supreme Court cases, they're so big, so monumental, they just end up feeling kind of like distant thunder.
I see what you mean.
You hear the rumble, something major just happened. But really getting down to the nitty-gritty, really understanding, well, that's where we come in.
Right. Got to unpack it all.
Exactly. So today, we're handing you a front row seat to one of these landmark cases. We're diving deep into Citizens United v. FEC, specifically the oral arguments.
Ah, the oral arguments. They're fascinating, because you get to hear the arguments straight from the lawyers, unfiltered.
Absolutely. And what's really at the heart of this case and what we're going to explore is this fundamental question. Should corporations have the same First Amendment rights as individuals when it comes to spending money on political campaigns?
Now, that is a question with no easy answers, that's for sure.
And it's one that Citizens United, a group actually much smaller than their name might suggest, really wrestled with head on.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to highlight. Citizens United's lawyer, Theodore Olson, he really emphasized that this wasn't just some, big faceless corporation, but a group of individuals who were passionate, deeply passionate about their right to be heard in the political arena, especially on this one issue they felt was critical to our democracy.
And this is where the case goes way beyond legal technicalities. It cuts to the very core of how our political system functions.
I see that.
Whose voice gets amplified in elections? Who gets to wield influence? Because that's what's at stake here.
Absolutely. The power dynamics.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating is how these big abstract questions become very real, very tangible when you dig into the actual arguments themselves. So let's get into it. How did Citizens United's lawyer, Theodore Olson, actually make his case? It sounds like he took a pretty bold approach, arguing that limiting corporate spending on campaigns, it's almost like censorship.
Yeah, it was a bold move.
Yeah.
Olson's argument was basically that corporations, they're informed by individuals, right? So their right to free speech shouldn't just disappear because they decide to organize themselves as a company.
Okay, so he's focusing on the individual aspect of corporations.
Exactly. And he's saying that spending money is itself a form of speech, especially in the context of a campaign. Limiting that spending for corporations is basically, it's like muzzling them. It's limiting their ability to express their views.
It's interesting, this whole money equals speech idea, it's definitely been controversial, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely.
But Olson, he didn't stop there. He actually compared, get this, he compared requiring corporations to use PACs, those political action committees, to
ventriloquism.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was it. He said it was like forcing a corporation to speak through a puppet.
Which, when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. His point was that if a corporation can't speak directly about the issues that it cares about, if it's forced to go through this separate entity, a PAC, then is it really free speech? Is it really authentic?
So it's about genuine expression, at least according to Olson. But obviously the government had a very different take on this. What was the counter-argument? What did their lawyer, Alina Kagan, have to say?
Okay, so Kagan, she presented a completely different perspective, right?
Yeah.
Her core argument, it really rested on this idea that corporations, they're different from individuals in a key way. They're mostly driven by profit, by the bottom line, not necessarily by those, deeply held convictions that individuals might have.
So she's highlighting a really fundamental difference in their nature, corporations versus individuals.
Exactly. Because if you allow unlimited corporate spending in campaigns, she argued, it could easily lead to corruption.
Makes sense.
It could give these special interests way too much power, way too much influence over the political process. And it's not even just about the money itself, but this potential for like a quid pro quo system where it seems like favors are being bought and sold.
And in that kind of system, what happens to the voices of everyday citizens, right? When corporations potentially have this kind of spending power.
And Kagan, she was prepared to address that very concern. She actually brought up shareholders.
Shareholders, okay.
Yeah, she argued that, if you think about members of a union, right, they have ways to formally voice their dissent, like if they disagree with what the union is doing.
Right.
Shareholders, on the other hand, they don't have a similar way to opt out if their company decides to back a candidate or an issue that they just don't agree with.
It's like you're stuck on this train that you can't get off, even if you hate where it's going.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And that's where this case, it really starts to delve into these profound questions about corporate responsibility, their role in a democracy, and whether giving them the same rights as individuals could lead to unintended consequences. It's tricky stuff.
It's fascinating, though, how these arguments, they lay out the stakes so clearly. But what I really love about oral arguments is, seeing how the justices engage with them in real time.
Oh, absolutely. The oral arguments, that's where the real drama unfolds. It's
Right.
like you get this legal chess match going on as the justices, they're grilling both sides with these really pointed questions, and you can just feel the tension.
Totally. So what were some of those key moments, those clashes that really stood out to you?
Well, one that comes to mind is Justice Kennedy. He raised this really interesting issue. He's like, by trying to limit corporate influence, is the government actually at risk of silencing certain voices, the very voices they're trying to protect?
That's a good point.
Right. Like, is it possible that by limiting corporate spending, you could actually end up giving certain corporations a monopoly on participating in the political process, which kind of defeats the whole purpose, right?
It's that classic unintended consequences thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have Justice Scalia, never one to shy away from a strong opinion, right? He kind of pushed back on this whole idea that the government was worried about these great aggregations of wealth, as he put it, having too much influence.
Yeah, because that was a big part of their argument.
Right. But Scalia, he was like, hold on a second. A lot of these corporations, especially the ones represented by the Chamber of Commerce, these are small businesses.
Yeah.
So it's not just about these mega corporations trying to, buy elections. It's about these smaller enterprises wanting their voices to be heard too.
So it becomes about ensuring a level playing field, not just for those with the deepest pocket.
Exactly. And then, we can't forget about Chief Justice Roberts. He had some tough questions for Kagan about her whole argument on shareholders.
Which, yeah, that was a big part of her argument.
It was. He basically asked her, is it really fair to assume that shareholders are just powerless to stop their corporations from spending money on politics if they disagree with it? Like, shareholders can monitor what their companies are doing, right?
Yeah.
They could even sell their shares in protest. So it's not like they're totally helpless in this situation.
It really highlights that tension, between individual responsibility and like where does the government step in, where does it not? It's a tough one.
No easy answers, that's for sure. And those are just a few of the many, many fascinating exchanges that you can find in the oral argument transcripts for this case. Really gives you a sense of just how complex this issue is, how many different angles there are to consider. Now, I know we don't want to spoil the ending, but as you know, the court did end up siding with Citizens United, 5-4 decision, and they struck down some pretty key provisions of campaign finance law in the process.
5-4. Wow, talk about a nail biter. This case, it wasn't just significant legally. I mean, it really ignited this huge debate that's still going strong today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really boils down to this. If we're saying corporations have the same rights as individuals, then where do we draw the line? How do we balance those rights with the need to make sure our democracy is fair and equitable?
It's a question that goes way beyond just this one case. It's something we all need to keep grappling with, keep discussing, and, what better way to start than by diving deep into the source material itself. So we encourage everyone listening, don't just take our word for it. Check out the oral arguments, explore the intricacies of Citizens United v. FEC. You might be surprised at what you discover.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating case. Really makes you think.
It does. And on that note, until next time, happy deep diving, everyone.